Believe it or not, this was not some made-up story. The day everything collapsed began with a single phrase that destroyed me. My wife Katherine looked at me and called me worthless. She added that she was taking our children, Lucas and Sophia. Those words hit harder than losing my job at the Detroit auto plant that same morning. I had walked into the factory where I had worked for almost 10 years only to learn that my position no longer existed. No warning, no gratitude, just a cardboard box with my belongings and a handshake. By the time Katherine spoke those words, I already felt hollow. But when she said she was taking my children, I realized I had lost everything. I stood in shock. I walked out not knowing where to go, the cold September air stinging my face. My mind screamed that she was right, that I had failed not only her but also Lucas and Sophia. I wondered for hours until I found myself standing before a small diner glowing with warm yellow light in the night. But before I explain that evening, I need to tell you who I was before it all unraveled. I grew up in a family that believed in honest work. My father, Thomas, was a Navy veteran who could fix any boat engine. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, it mattered. As a teenager, furious over a broken motorcycle, I once heard him say that a man is measured by how he stands when everything else is falling apart. Back then, I didn't understand. Years later, those words would return to me. My mother, Margaret, was a literature teacher. A quiet but kind woman who believed in second chances. She would sit with me late into the night when I struggled in school, convincing me that patience mattered more than speed. I carried her lessons into adulthood, though somewhere along the way I began to doubt them. I was never a star, but I worked hard. I took pride in showing up at the auto plant early even when my back ached. The job was not prestigious, but it paid the bills. For a long time, I believed that proved my worth. The smell of machine oil and hot metal became a part of me. When I came home with blackened hands, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. Then came Katherine. She was an architect, confident and sharp. Where I hesitated, she moved forward. In the early years of our marriage, she said she felt safe with me. I held on to that thought for years. We built a family, and when Lucas was born, followed 3 years later by Sophia, I thought we had found the happiness people talk about. But with time, her feelings shifted. Safety turned into complaints of being stuck. Stability became stagnation in her eyes. After yet another argument about money, her gaze grew colder. To her, I had never wanted more out of life, content to remain where I was, never aiming higher. In a way, she was right. I once dreamed of opening my own repair shop, but I buried that dream when I married. Each morning I walked to the plant. Each evening I tried to be a good husband and father. I believed it was enough. For her, it wasn't. The children never looked at me with disappointment. 10-year-old Lucas had his mother's sharp mind, but my quiet nature. He peppered me with questions how engines worked, why people fought even when they loved each other. His voice carried such curiosity, and his eyes lit up when I explained something new. 7-year-old Sophia lived with a joy that filled every room. She twirled through the house and showed me new down steps when I came home from work. Her laughter chimed like bells, and her hugs were so tight that I forgot my troubles. They made my life lighter. They were my reason to keep moving forward. My younger brother Brian was more ambitious. The sales manager, he played golf for successful men and more expensive suits. One evening over beers, he suggested I needed to fight for myself, that I let life roll over me. I laughed it off, but his words stuck. Standing beside him, I felt like a man standing still. When the plant let me go, I felt everything that defined me collapse. For 10 years, I walked through those gates every day. That day, driving home with a box of my things, my chest grew tighter. I pictured Katherine's face, her reaction to the news. When I walked into the house, she was waiting. Her eyes moved from me to the box in my hands. The unspoken question of whether I had been fired carried no surprise, only cold certainty. I nodded and tried to explain it was downsizing, that I couldn't have prevented it. She folded her arms, and her face told me she saw it as more proof of my weakness. I tried to assure her I would find another job, that this wasn't the end. But she cut me off, told me I was nothing, and declared she was taking the children. The walls of the house pressed in. I wanted to fight to prove her wrong. I looked at the photos on the walls, the children's drawings on the fridge, and felt emptiness spreading in my chest. Katherine packed a bag and explained to the kids they would spend the night with her sister Patricia in Cleveland. Lucas looked at me with confused eyes, his voice trembling as he asked if I was coming with them. My throat tightened as I forced a smile and shook my head, promising we'd see each other soon. Sophia clung silently to her mother but kept glancing back at me, waiting for answers I didn't have. I stood in the doorway as they left. The sound of the car pulling out cut through the silence. Alone, I placed the factory box on the kitchen table. Inside were the pieces of my work life, a thermos, gloves, Lucas's drawing of us fixing a car, small tools that had carried me through. It was unbearable. I needed air, so I stepped outside. My feet carried me without purpose, each step heavier than the last, until I saw the neon glow of a diner. Lakeview was a small roadside place by Lake Erie, squeezed between a pawn shop and a gas station. Its windows glowed yellow. I stepped inside, and warmth wrapped around me. The air smelled of bacon and coffee. I sat against the back wall, away from the other customers. A waitress brought me coffee. I nodded and stared out the window. The reflection staring back looked older than 35, broken by failure. My hand shook as I held the cup. The voices in my head were louder than the hum of the fan. Every money argument with my wife, every sigh when I came home late, every moment of silence where comfort should have been all of it led here. I pressed my palms against my face, trying to quiet the noise in my head. Then I heard the scrape of a chair. Someone sat across from me. I lowered my hands and saw an old man watching me with steady interest. His weathered face was marked by sun and time. His hair was grey but neatly combed, his clothes clean. His first words stunned me. He said I looked exactly like his son. I blinked and shook my head. His son had disappeared 35 years ago, and he had been searching ever since. Then he fell silent. I offered sympathy for his son, but emphasized that I wasn't him. The old man nodded, but didn't move. He introduced himself as Harold and extended his hand. I hesitated, then took it. His grip was firm. I told him my name was Jacob. Harold nodded, folding his hands on the table. I admitted that I wasn't looking for more trouble, but that I had lost everything that day: my job in the morning, my wife in the evening, my children with her. My throat tightened as I confessed she had taken them away. I clenched my fist on the table. I admitted I didn't know what to do anymore. Each time I tried, it was never enough. 10 years at a plant, and they discarded me without thought. I built a home, yet my wife insisted I have ruined it. My children looked at me with confusion, and I had no answers. Harold leaned closer, his eyes piercing mine, making me realize this couldn't be the end of the story. I frowned, not sure what he wanted me to see. He exhaled deeply, and in that breath I felt his conviction. I had a choice to rise, to keep fighting, to stop letting others' words define my life. Harold revealed he had never stopped searching for his son, even after 35 years. He refused to accept silence as a final verdict. If he had given up, his son's story would have ended in disappearance, and his own life in regret. But he kept going, because hope was the only thing that gave him strength. The diner faded into the background. The hum of the refrigerator, the clatter of dishes, the smell of burnt bacon, all of it disappeared. Something stirred faintly inside my chest, small but alive. I didn't understand why Harold had chosen me. In his gaze there was no pity, only recognition. He saw the same emptiness that had lived in him for years, and he refused to let me drown in it. He leaned in closer. His words were calm and spare, yet they cut to the bone. 5 simple words, and I already knew this man was not who he claimed to be. Harold leaned closer. He carried a scent that reminded me of something old and familiar, like the cologne in my grandfather's cabinet. His eyes stayed on me longer than I could bear. He spoke only 5 words. Simple, yet they sank into me and remained. Don't abandon them like I did. Everything I had been feeding myself in the past hour was that I was weak, that my wife was right, that the children were better off without me suddenly fell apart. I kept repeating those words until they etched themselves into the deepest part of my mind. Harold leaned back, his expression softening as if he could see his message had reached me. Then he began to tell me about his son. The boy's name was Tommy. He was 17 when he disappeared. Harold had worked as a long-haul truck driver, living in the cab of his rig for weeks at a time, coming home only tired or with a bottle in hand. There was never enough energy for conversations. His wife reminded him that the son needed a father, but he brushed it off, insisting a teenager would figure things out on his own. Then one morning, Tommy's bed was empty. On the nightstand was a scrap of paper with 3 words, "Can't do this anymore." After the disappearance, Harold walked every street around his home. He checked garages, vacant lots, neighbors' basements, bus stops, and the alleys where teenagers gathered after school. When there was no trace nearby, he widened the search to the entire neighborhood, then to the next, and then to towns beyond. These turned to weeks, weeks into months. The search became his life. For 35 years, Harold drove across the country in his truck. At every stop, in every roadside diner, and at every gas station, he pulled a crumpled photo of Tommy from his pocket and showed it to strangers, asking if they had seen the boy. Most only shook their heads, but he never stopped. His life became a road and a question, repeated again and again like a prayer. He gave up everything for the search, money, a house, even his wife. All that remained was the road and the photograph of his son. Accepting that Tommy had left because of his indifference would have been worse than death, so he kept searching. When Harold spoke, his voice trembled. In his story, I saw myself only 35 years older, a weary man chasing forgiveness that could never be reached. He placed his hand on my wrist. His fingers were warm. He looked into my eyes and urged me to go to my children while I still could. To go before it was too late. While they still remembered the sound of my footsteps and the warmth of my hands. While I still had a chance to be the father they deserved. I thanked him, and he said he would be there if I wanted to return and share how it went. The road to Cleveland took only an hour, but it felt like an eternity. Every mile was filled with voices in my head, Katherine calling me worthless, Lucas asking if I was coming with them, Sophia clinging silently to her mother. But louder than all was Harold's voice, don't abandon them like I did. By the time I turned onto Patricia's street, my palms were slick with sweat and my heart pounded in my chest. A house stood in a quiet neighborhood where every lawn was trimmed perfectly and the streetlights cast soft pools of light on the sidewalks. I parked across the road and sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the lit windows. A shadow passed by one of them, maybe Katherine. I knew she didn't expect me. I knew my arrival would anger her. The Harold's words burned in my mind, and I couldn't wait for a miracle any longer. When Patricia opened the door, her face shifted from surprise to concern. She resembled Katherine, but with softer features, gentler. As a nurse, she always knew how to comfort others, but at that moment her eyes revealed uncertainty. She told me Katherine wasn't expecting me, that the children were already asleep. I asked her to call my wife, saying I needed to talk. After a pause, she nodded and disappeared into the house. Katherine came out minutes later, her face like stone. She closed the door firmly behind her, clearly unwilling to let me inside. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her arms crossed in a defensive stance I knew well. When she demanded to know why I was there, her fingers widened from the force of her grip. Her voice could have frozen like Erie. I took a breath and began to speak. I told her about Harold, about his missing son, about 35 years of regret. I explained that I didn't want to become him, didn't want our children growing up believing their father had simply given up. My job was gone, yes, but I refused to let that loss sever me from Lucas and Sophia. I would fight to stay in their lives, find work again, become better. But I would not disappear. Katherine listened in silence, her face unreadable. When I finished, she looked at me for several long seconds as if she were seeing me for the first time. Then her lips quivered, not in weakness, but in something close to surprise. She admitted that in all our years together she had never heard me speak with such passion about anything. I had always agreed or stayed quiet. But now, she said, there was a fire in my eyes she hadn't seen since the beginning of our marriage. She did not forgive me that night. She did not promise everything would be fine or that we would try again. But something in her gaze shifted. Some of her hardness gave way to cautious curiosity. She agreed to let me see the children in the morning, with a warning, if I disappointed them, I would lose them forever. I spent the night in a cheap hotel nearby, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Images of Harold, his story of loss, and those 5 words spun endlessly in my head. There was something about him I couldn't shake. Not only his pain or his wisdom, but the way he appeared at the exact moment I was about to collapse. The words he chose. The feeling that he knew me better than I knew myself. The next morning at 9 sharp, I returned. Katherine's face was watchful, not hostile. Behind her stood Lucas and Sophia. My son looked uncertain, his eyes darting between me and his mother. Sophia clung to her but studied me with curiosity. My heart ached with guilt and tenderness at once. I knelt down and told them I knew yesterday had been terrible for all of us. I said that parents sometimes fight, but that didn't mean either of us loved them any less. I explained that losing my job had upset everyone, but I would find another. Most importantly, I would always be their father, and nothing would change how much I loved them. Lucas was the first to step toward me. His hug was cautious, as if afraid I might vanish again. But gradually his arms tightened, and I felt him relax against me. Sophia followed, wrapping her arms around my neck. The smell of apple shampoo in her hair made me close my eyes and hold her tighter. We spent an hour playing their favorite games. Lucas showed me a new book about cars he had been reading, while Sophia danced the routine she had learned the week before. Her movements were clumsy but full of enthusiasm, and when she finished, her eyes sparkled with pride. I clapped so loudly that Patricia peeked from the kitchen with a smile. When it was time to leave, Lucas took my hand and asked if he would see me tomorrow. I looked at Katherine, who was watching us. She gave a barely perceptible nod. I promised Lucas I would. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Mornings were spent searching for work, calling repair shops, factories, anywhere that might need my skills. Afternoons I spent with the children. Katherine allowed 2 hours a day, always under her or Patricia's supervision. I didn't argue. I knew I had to earn her trust again. By the end of the week, I had found temporary work at a small repair shop on Cleveland's outskirts. The pay was meager, but the owner, an older man named Frank, said if I proved myself, he might offer me a permanent position. I worked with doubled energy, arriving early and staying later than anyone. My hands grew black with grease again, my back ached each night, but I felt alive. One evening I returned to Lakeview Diner, hoping to find Harold. I wanted to tell him how his words had changed me. But he wasn't there. The same waitress with tired eyes remembered me. I described Harold to her, asked if she knew him. She frowned and said she didn't. She had worked there for 10 years and knew every regular, but no one matched my description. I described him again: grey hair, wetted face, the scent of cologne. I recalled his handshake, the glint in his eye under the diner lights. But she looked at me as though I were describing a ghost. A week later I returned again. Harold was still absent. The waiter suggested checking the security footage. We watched the recording of that night, and there I was, sitting alone in the corner. No one sat across from me. The camera showed me entering, sitting down, staying there for about an hour, moving my lips as if in conversation, then leaving. No one else appeared in the frame. Either the cameras had failed, or Harold Benson was something more than a lonely old man searching for his son. Or something had happened in that diner that defied explanation. And the most unsettling part was that I had no idea which. But one thing I knew for certain: the 5 words that changed my life were real. Whatever Harold was or wasn't, his message had saved my family. And now, as doubts about his existence grew, I knew I had to uncover the truth. Because the more I thought about it, the more I realized Harold's story was too perfect, too precisely tailored to my situation. And in his eyes, when he spoke of his son, there had been something I still couldn't explain. If Harold had never existed, then who was it that sat across from me in that diner? I'd even searched directories for Harold Benson. Every result came back the same: no such person existed. In the meantime, my life was slowly finding its footing again. Frank, the owner of the repair shop, was pleased with my work and offered me a permanent position with decent pay. Katherine allowed me to see Lucas and Sophia without supervision, and we began spending entire weekends together. Something between us was starting to thaw, though moving back home was still far from reality. And then something happened I could never have imagined. One afternoon I was working under the hood of an old Ford when the radio in the shop switched to local news. The announcer spoke about the anniversary of a tragedy on Highway 41 that had taken place 35 years ago. I froze, wrench in hand, listening. 35 years, the exact length of time Harold said he had been searching for his son. A strange feeling came over me, one I couldn't put into words. After finishing my work, I asked Frank if I could leave early and drove straight to the local library. The newspaper archives were kept on microfilm in the basement, and I spent the entire evening scrolling through issues from 35 years ago. I kept searching, and then I found it. The front page of the Cleveland Plain Dealer from October 15th read: "Truck driver and son killed in Highway 41 crash." Beneath the headline was a photo of a wrecked truck. Beside it, 2 portraits: a middle-aged man with weary eyes, and a 17-year-old boy with gentle features. The caption below stopped my heart: Harold Benson, 42, and his son Thomas Benson, 17, killed instantly in collision with another truck. I was stunned. Harold Benson truly had been a truck driver. He really had a son named Tommy, though officially he was Thomas. They had been on the road together that night, but according to the newspaper, both were killed instantly. 35 years ago. I read the article again and again. It included interviews with relatives who described Harold as a man who worked too much and spent too little time at home. His wife had died of cancer 2 years before the accident. The boy was his only child, the last family he had left. Neighbors recalled the teenager growing withdrawn in his final months, clashing often with his father, who resented him for not being able to cope without his mother. The last paragraph pierced me to the core. According to investigators, the crash occurred around midnight when the driver lost control from exhaustion. Thomas had wanted to drop out of school, and his father opposed it. The tragedy ended their argument, leaving only sorrow behind. I sat in the empty library staring at the microfilm screen. The man I had met was dead, gone for 35 years. His story of decades-long searching had been false. They had died together that night. And yet somehow that very man had sat with me in a diner and spoken words that saved my family. I asked the librarian to print a copy of the article and drove home in shock. The whole way back, I tried to reason with myself, searching for a rational explanation. At home, I laid the article out on the kitchen table and studied the photos again. Harold looked younger, his hair not yet fully grey, but the face was unmistakable. The same eyes, the same tight line of the lips. It was him. The dead man who had sat across from me in Lakeview Diner. But the strangest thing wasn't that. The strangest part was that I didn't feel fear. A normal man would have been terrified to realize he had spoken with a ghost. I didn't feel terror. I felt sorrow and gratitude. This man had spent 35 years after death trying to right his mistake. And somehow he had found me, someone walking the same dim path. The next day was Saturday, and I took the kids for the entire day. We went to the Cleveland Zoo, and for the first time in months I felt completely present with them. Lucas was thrilled by the lions, while Sophia couldn't tear herself away from the penguins. When she held my hand and said I was the best dad in the world, my heart clenched. That evening, when I brought them back to Patricia's, Katherine was waiting on the porch. Something had shifted in her over the past weeks. The hardness in her eyes had softened, and when she looked at me with the children, there was something like hope. The kids chatted about the zoo, and she listened with a smile I hadn't seen in months. When Lucas and Sophia went inside, Katherine lingered. She asked if I wanted coffee. We sat on the porch steps, and she began to talk. For the first time in a long while, she didn't speak with reproach, but simply shared her thoughts. She admitted she had been terrified when I lost my job, because she had always seen me as her anchor. When that anchor slipped, she panicked and said things she shouldn't have. I listened, and a warmth grew in my chest, a feeling I had nearly forgotten. Not passion, not infatuation, but something deeper understanding. We had both made mistakes. We had both been afraid. But we both loved our children. When she asked if I wanted to stay for dinner, I felt something shift between us. Not forgiveness, not a return to what we once had, but the beginning of something new. At dinner, the children were overjoyed to see us at one table. Lucas talked about his volcano skull project, and Sophia showed us her new dance. Simple moments proved more powerful than any declarations of love. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, I told Katherine about the old man. Not that he was dead, that would have sounded insane, but that meeting him had changed my life. That it had shown me what it meant to be a father. She listened intently, tugging at the sleeve of her sweater. When I finished, she placed her hand gently on mine. Her touch was cautious but warm. Her voice trembled slightly as she admitted she could see how much I had changed, and that gave her hope. We didn't rush into promises, we didn't talk about moving back together. But for the first time in months, we were looking in the same direction. That night I drove home with a light heart, but thoughts of Harold wouldn't leave me. I finally understood why he had appeared at that place and that time. He hadn't been searching for his son. Tommy had died with him 35 years ago. He had been searching for a chance to stop another tragedy. A chance to say the words he never managed to say to his boy. But one detail kept gnawing at me. The article mentioned the accident had happened as they were driving to the hospital after a fight. Harold and Tommy died without making peace. And now, 35 years later, Harold had helped me avoid the same fate. He had helped me hold on to my children where he had lost his own. Yet deep down I knew his story wasn't finished. If he truly was a ghost, if he truly sought redemption by helping men like me, what would finally grant him peace? And most of all, was I the only father he had visited, or were there others out there who had also heard those same 5 words that changed my life? The answer to my questions came unexpectedly a week after that family dinner. I was at the shop when Frank walked in with the morning paper in his hands. His face looked uneasy. He unfolded the newspaper in front of me and pointed to a small article on the 3rd page. A headline read, "Local man claims to have met a ghost in a diner." The piece was short, but every word echoed inside my chest. A man named Robert Chen, a father of 2 from a nearby town, told a reporter about a strange encounter in a roadside cafe. He had lost his job, his wife had filed for divorce, and he sat there alone, contemplating suicide, when an elderly man joined him. The stranger shared a story about a lost son and spoke 5 words that changed everything. Don't abandon them like I did. My blood pounded in my temples as I read on. The man described the old man's appearance exactly as I remembered: the grey hair, weathered face, the smell of old-fashioned cologne. But when he tried to find him the next day, no one in the cafe remembered him. The security cameras showed only the engineer sitting alone, speaking to empty air. My hands trembled as I finished the article. The reporter admitted he didn't believe in ghosts, but the encounter had saved Chen's family. He had found a new job, reconciled with his wife, and they were living together again. At the end, Chen added that if anyone else had met the same old man, he wanted to hear from them. I asked Frank for the rest of the day off and drove home, thoughts racing. I wasn't the only one. Somewhere in Ohio, another man, another father, had been saved by the ghost of a long-dead truck driver. How many of us were there? How many families had been preserved because he appeared in their darkest hour? At home, I pulled out the clipping about the crash and compared it to the new article. The dates matched. Chen had met the stranger on the anniversary of that tragedy. The same had happened to me. It was as if the old man appeared only on that date, seeking out those repeating his mistakes. I couldn't ignore it. Through the newspaper, I reached out to Chen and we agreed to meet. 2 days later, I drove to a small town an hour from Cleveland, my heart pounding with nerves. What would I say to this man? How would we talk about meeting a dead man who had changed our lives? Robert was a Chinese engineer in his 40s. We met in the cafe where he had seen the old man. When I walked in, he was already in the corner booth, nervously twisting a coffee cup in his hands. His eyes betrayed the same man I had been a month earlier broken, but clinging to hope. We talked for 3 hours. His story mirrored mine almost exactly. Losing his job at an auto company, the growing tension in his marriage, the crushing sense of worthlessness. That night he had sat in a cafe with a vial of sleeping pills in his pocket enough to ensure he'd never wake again. And then the old man appeared. The details matched perfectly. The scent of cologne, the warm grip of his hands, the story of a lost son. Even the words were the same: don't abandon them like I did. Robert, too, had tried to track the men down. Robert, too, found nothing on the cameras. And like me, he hadn't felt fear when he realized who he had spoken to. When he asked if I believed it was a ghost, I stayed silent for a long time. Then I told him about the newspaper article about the father and son who had died long ago. His face went pale, but he nodded. He said that deep down, he had always known he hadn't met an ordinary man. We decided to visit the crash site together. Highway 41 cut through wooded hills about half an hour away. We found a memorial plaque by a sharp bend in the road. On the metal plate were 2 names, Harold Benson and Thomas Benson. Beneath them were their dates of birth and death, and the simple words, father and son, united in eternity. Standing at that plaque, I felt a strange calm. Not fear, not dread at having spoken to the dead, but a deep gratitude. This man had spent years wandering between worlds trying to right his mistake. Every anniversary of his death, he sought out fathers walking his path and gave them the chance he never had. Robert placed a hand on my shoulder. We stood in silence, 2 men saved by ghost, grasping the enormity of what had happened to us. How many more were there? How many families had been kept whole by a truck driver who couldn't forgive himself for one final argument with his son? As we drove away, Robert said something that etched itself into my memory. He suggested maybe we hadn't met by accident. Maybe our task now was to share the story so other fathers would understand it's never too late to fight for your family while you're still alive. That night I lay awake, turning his words over and over. The next day, I went to Katherine. It was time to tell her everything, the whole truth about what had happened in the Lakeview diner. Not to impress her with a ghost story, but because she deserved to know what had saved our family. She listened quietly, without interruption. I saw her catch her breath when I told her about the article. When I finished, she stayed silent for a long while, staring out the window. Then she turned to me, and in her eyes was something new, not just understanding, but something like reverence. Her lips trembled into the first relaxed smile I had seen in years. Her fingers tightened around my hand as she said she had always felt it the day I returned to her porch. I was not the same man. Something had broken and come together again inside me, stronger than before. We spoke late into the night. about what it meant to be a family, about second chances, about how even death could give life. Katherine admitted she too had made mistakes, too cold, too demanding. But seeing how much I had changed, she realized we both deserved another chance. A month later, I moved back home. Not because we pretended nothing had happened, but because we had become different people. Katherine no longer saw me as a failure, and I no longer felt like one. The children's faces lit up with joy when we told them I was coming home for good. 6 months have passed since that night in Lakeview Diner. I still work at Frank's repair shop, but now he has made me his partner. We are planning to open a second location. Katherine received a promotion at her architecture firm and is designing the home of her dreams, our family's new home. Lucas has grown fascinated with mechanics and spends weekends helping me in the garage. Sophia has joined a dance studio and dreams of becoming a ballerina. But the most important thing is that we've learned to talk. Not to shout, not to accuse, but to talk. When problems arise, we sit at the kitchen table and face them together. I no longer hide in silence, and Katherine no longer bottles up resentment. We understand now, family isn't made of perfect people who never make mistakes. Family is made of people who are willing to forgive and begin again. Sometimes in the evenings, I still drive to Lakeview Diner. I sit in the same corner booth and order coffee. Not because I expect to see the old man again, I know he won't come. His mission with me is complete. I go there to remember. To remember how close I came to losing everything that mattered. To remember that even in the darkest night, someone can appear to extend a hand. Recently, I created an online page where people could share their encounters with the mysterious old man. In a month, 12 people have written. All fathers, all with similar stories. Some met him in cafes, others at gas stations or bars. But the words were always the same: don't abandon them like I did. And I realized something important: you don't have to believe in ghosts to understand the truth of this story. It doesn't matter whether Harold was truly a dead man or simply a kind stranger my mind turned into a savior. What matters is that his words were real. What matters is that I heard them and changed. Every father stands on the edge at least once in his life. A job lost, a marriage breaking, children drifting away, and it feels easier to vanish than to fight. But in that very moment, you must remember, your children don't need you perfect, they need you present. They need a father who rises after failure, who fights for them even when he can't fight for himself. Don't abandon them. Don't become the man who spends his life regretting. Be there now while you still have the chance. While you can hold them. While you can tell them you love them. While you can show them that family is greater than everything else. This is the story of a second chance I was given. But every one of you already has a first chance waiting to be used right now. Don't wait for the old man in the diner. Be the father your children deserve while you're still alive. I tell you this story not to frighten or amaze you, but because I know someone out there is sitting in their own diner right now. Someone has lost a job. Someone is fighting with his wife. Someone feels his children don't understand him. If that's you, listen to me. Your family needs you. Not a flawless hero, but a real father. One who doesn't give up. Write in the comments what this story means to you. Share it with someone who is struggling right now. And remember, as long as you have today, you still have a chance to change everything. Your children aren't waiting for a hero, they're waiting for you. Hey. That's it, today's story comes to an end. And honestly, thank you from the heart of the Redditor-X-Tales family for staying with us until the very last word. We at Redditor-X-Tales love to know what you think really. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read them all. And trust me, your words mean more than you realize. If you're hungry for more, the full playlist is waiting in the description. And don't worry, new true stories are already on the way. The Redditor-X-Tales family can't wait to share them with you. If this journey touched you even a little, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you'll never miss the next story. Once again, thank you for listening. Until next time, take care.